Well, sometimes in life, in ministry, or at work, you'll hear something that sounds very intuitive and you'll wonder why you never thought about it. Well, today in Practical Church Planting, we're going to try to do some of that for you as we share 6 helpful ministry tips that you can apply in your ministry that you might not have thought about.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and with me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to give you 6 helpful ministry tips that you might not know about.
That's right. And as we jump into this episode today is sponsored by Ambassadors Ministries. Wouldn't it be nice to have a larger paid staff or more leaders to give you this dedicated time for the mission God has you for your church? Of course, the answer is yes. But of course, as we know, many ministries and churches and church plants don't have the finances to add additional staff, even if you need it. So Ambassadors Ministries wants to help. They enable you to hire leaders you've identified by coaching them to fundraise full-time, part-time, or supplementary salary at no cost to your church, and helps them support and all the supportive administrative tasks in order to make that happen. So if you want more information, check out ambassadorsministries.com/practical, ambassadorsministries.com/practical, or check out the show notes for more information. Again, we're big fans of this. We've had multiple staff members raise staff over the 5.5 years we've been a church. And one of the things I tell church planners often that they kind of don't realize, which is what we're talking about this episode, is like things that like you didn't know you could do. And then after you're told, you're like, why didn't I think about that? That's like literally what this episode's about. Having not just the lead pastor raise support, like that's assumed you can do that, but if the rest of the staff, we kind of don't think they can. And so we've had many people join staff by raising support, and it's been a big difference for us.
Yeah, and I'd also encourage you to either reach out or at least just kind of save the resource, even if you don't have anyone raising support right now.
Yep.
Because it's difficult to figure it all out just on your own down the road and just trying to figure out what that even looks like. So even if you don't have someone that raising support right now, save their contact info, look them up, and save it for future use.
ambassadorsministries.com/practical. Now, that being said, 6 other helpful things other than that. Ministry tips you might not know about, or when you think about it, you're like, oh my goodness, that makes a lot of sense. I see this a lot, being able to help out with some of the Acts 29 assessments. So kind of give some thoughts or some feedback. And they're like, that's a great idea. I never thought of it. And I'm like, yeah, I did not necessarily think of this stuff myself. It was told.
Right.
So it's not like we're smart. But anyway, that's the hope. Some of this you might be like, oh, I've heard of that. Some of that might be like, I've never heard of that. But this has all been really helpful for us.
There you go.
So here we go. Number 1, child care reimbursement. And what we mean by this is it doesn't have to just be the lead pastor, but if it's a smaller church plant setting, having child care help and reimbursement for your kids, whether that is ministry events or even non-ministry events. And so we're fortunate, Christy and I, to have family here, and so a lot of childcare gets helped by family stuff.
Yep.
But not all, and of course, if you don't have any family at all, that can make it really difficult as well. Is to in your church budget have a allotment for childcare expenses.
Right.
So you can do things, have people go places, go to church events, have people over, whatever, go on a date night, just doing some things without your kids, so that you can be with church people, but also so that you can be healthy. And a lot of times, when I say this, they're like, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense." When we say this, we don't recommend like whatever your church decides is a good monthly budget for that. This does not make your salary that much more, because there's taxes involved and all that sort of things. That's not what it's about. It's how we do it for us is we kind of track for the month. At the end of the month, we put it in my card, debit, the spending, whatever the thing's called. Expense report. And then we write a check at the end of the month of the things that we use the child care for. Sometimes we don't use it very much because we have a lot of family help, and sometimes there's a lot of stuff going on, or like weddings and that sort of thing, and there are multiple hour events.
Yeah.
And so it goes a little bit more sometimes. But having child care reimbursement is a really helpful thing, especially when you're not making a lot of money and there's a lot of stuff you have to do. Of course, a lot of stuff is kid-friendly, but not always. And so putting that in the church budget.
Yeah, exactly. There's a few of these that this falls under, but there's not many, especially in a church plant, many benefits that come with a church plant. Like, we're not going to be recommending, we're not going to talk about things like health insurance or things like that. Yeah. But there's things that you would typically get in a regular job that just probably are not going to be there, at least at the beginning in a church plant. And so as many kind of benefits, so to speak, that you can work into the budget that make sense, that are actually helpful, the better. I mean, obviously, this isn't just an effort to like retain your lead pastor or yourself if you're listening, but there's just not a lot of things that you can really afford to do that are kind of benefit wise. But there's a few that you can, and so this is definitely one of them that you can. And like, so how it works for us, we don't monitor the way Dylan uses it. We don't. In other words, he doesn't have to say like on this day we went here, on this day we went here. Now, obviously, if there's an instance where we felt like it was being abused, that'd be a different case. But especially in the very beginning, it's like, hey, this is for these kind of things, and you submit it, and as long as and we have a budget for it, so as long as it never gets out of hand or over the budget, then we're pretty good with it. And so it's pretty easy to manage, pretty easy to track and take care of. But it's something that one of the few things that you can do kind of on the financial side outside of a salary for or in a church plant.
Yeah, and it might be different if you're a larger church listening to this, which there might not be very many. And if you have like multiple people doing this, you might want to be really strict on like you need to tell us exactly the time, exactly what it was, but for us to stay within the budget. And it's just really helpful because again, a lot of your job is people, and sometimes it's hard to do some of those people things if you have your kids there. And so I would put it in the budget now, and then you just work around it. It doesn't need to be excessive. It doesn't need to be a ton. But it depends on where you live, how many kids you have, that sort of thing. I mean, if you have family and stuff that can help, which has been really big helpful for us. But this allows you to do certain things you just couldn't do or have conversations you couldn't have if you didn't have that. And so it also just makes it easier, too, that you don't always have to like pick and choose what we can do.
Yeah.
And so, again, and it's not anyone's fault, but sometimes you get asked, people invite you to a lot of things or you go places or even like doing weddings. And it's like, when you do a wedding, for example, that's a rehearsal dinner and a wedding. And you got to, it would be unfortunate if you had to like lose money to do that. Now, a lot of people give you an efficient thing, so that helps anyway. But still, it's just there's a lot that goes into it, and so you should put it in your budget.
Childcare reimbursement.
But this is one of those things when I tell people, they're like, I didn't think of that, and it's really helpful. It's been helpful to us. So Number 2, flexible pay time off. Now, again, depending on the size of your church and all that sort of thing, it's you have to maybe a little bit more. I don't know what the word is. Organize is not the word, but track. I don't know what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is like it doesn't need to be this rigid thing, particularly for full-time staff.
Yeah.
Recently, at an assessment I was at recently, we were one of the couples we were assessing. We were kind of giving them the conditions and stuff to work through, and we were saying, hey, you and your wife. You need to take 2 weeks off because he was working for a full-time job for a while and doing the church plant thing and all that sort of thing. So you need to take 2 weeks off. One needs to be you and your wife. I mean, it doesn't have to be 7 days, 5 days, whatever. You need to go somewhere without the kids. We're talking about like a plan, like can they do this? Who can watch the kids, whatever. And then you need to do another week when you're just at home and you're not working at all.
Yeah.
And one of the things he said, he's like, well, I only get 3 weeks of pay time off a year. And 2 of them have already been used, and I've already got 1 more scheduled. And all of us in the room, so there's 3 pastors and a pastor's wife. We all looked at each other and just like, that's not good, or that's not enough. And we get it because pay time. But like it just needs to be flexible. Like what we do is not, you can't necessarily clock in and clock out of it. And so for us, we have I guess an unlimited policy, which that's kind of a newer thing, not a newer thing, but thing that many companies are doing. I think Netflix first made it famous or whatever. We found the problem is not typically taking too much time off, but not taking enough time off. And if people really want to do their job, they're going to make sure, that happens. Of course, if you have problems, you got to be willing to discuss the people that are not taking advantage of it or whatever. But it just needs to be flexible. It doesn't necessarily have to be unlimited, but this whole and again, if you have a board or whoever's the management team, elders, however this is structuring for you, particularly if you're a newer church or a smaller church, you're just starting out, like this whole, you get 2 weeks off or this, and it's just like, I get it, but it's just not, it needs to be flexible because life can be difficult. Things can come up, people might ask you to go somewhere, to do some things. So like you work, if you do a wedding, that's your whole weekend. That's a typical wedding's Friday and Saturday. So like, that's a whole weekend. Like where do you get that back and that sort of thing. So we just recommend being flexible. We're not saying unlimited, but 3 weeks, if you're a full-time pastor in a newer church or a smaller church, it's not enough.
Yeah.
So
this is one of the, it's like one of the things that's because ministry is a unique animal when it comes to like how the job structure is, because there's so many things that you do that are not like in the physical building, like having people over. That's working on the ministry, or like weddings, or taking people out to dinner or out to lunch, whatever. All those different things kind of factor into it. So in my mind, I mean, obviously, as things get bigger and bigger, and it gets to be more of like an HR department and actual different departments, then things do get a little bit trickier because it's a little bit harder to see what everyone's doing. But specifically in a church plant setting, you're never going to know what, like, especially if we're talking about like bringing on staff and having this as their policy as well. You're never going to know what everyone's doing at every hour of the day, because hopefully they're not all in the building every hour of the day. Like if everyone is just in the building and just working on the church in the building, but never seeing anybody else, then it's like, what are we actually doing here? We're just like, we're getting our processes in order, but we're not actually communicating with anybody or seeing anyone face to face. And so being flexible with that PTO means that you can allow people to do these things without having to tell you what they're doing all the time. You know, like if there's ever a day where we're like, you know, one of us are working from home or something like that, unless we have something kind of that we're working with the other person on, we don't feel the need to be like, hey, this is where I am here. Or if we're going out to lunch with somebody, like checking in with the other one, hey, just so you know, this is where I'm going kind of thing. Because we have a flexible PTO, you know, and because like some of it may be work, some of it may be taking some time off with the family, and either way, that's fine because we know that work's going to get done, and we know that we have you know, kind of a long enough track record with each other and with the staff that we know that even if time is taken off, that that responsibilities are going to be covered.
Yep.
So I think flexible PTO is a good starting point. Now, obviously, if you have someone that you feel like is abusing it, then you do need to think about what that alternative is. And thankfully, we haven't had to do that yet, though there's been times we've had to talk about what that would look like, but it hasn't actually happened. But have that in the back of your mind in case someone abuses it. But I wouldn't start from a point of afraid that someone's going to abuse it, so you make it too rigid.
Yep.
But start from being flexible and pray and hope you have a good enough relationship and cultivate that relationship with your staff that you won't likely have anyone abuse it for a long time.
Yeah, I just think the main point is, regardless of how much time off or whatever you decide, is like it shouldn't just be like this like tension point of like, can I take this day off or not?
Yep.
That's probably not a good thing. And another thing to your advantage, and I get wanting to have policies in place and run against those things, but most of the time, if it's a newer church or a smaller church, people who are joining the staff or wanting to join and do this thing, they're doing it because they care about it. They're not doing it because it's just a job, which means they're typically going above and beyond, or typically, you know, they're certainly not going to abuse it. If not, it's like, hey, you need to be off because you're always here or you're always. And so I'm not against thinking ahead in policies and structures, but I think sometimes we can really handicap where we are in the moment for what we think might happen 10 years down the line.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it just needs to be, I don't know. There's a lot of tensions and difficulties in ministry, whether or not you can take a day off here, a couple days off here, or a week here. I hate to see when that's like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that when you've got a lot of stuff going on. And so whatever you want that to look like, we just recommend that it would be flexible. Yeah. And again, like we said at the first point, there's not a lot of benefits in terms of the traditional work benefits working at a newer, smaller church. And so this is one of those things that you can do well.
They can offer.
So flexible playtime off. Number 3, dream about what you want to do. Now, this is something I find myself saying often at these assessments and when I just talk to people in ministry, pastors, planters. Like we just have this in our mind that like ministry has to be like this hard grind, miserable thing, or maybe we don't communicate that, but like we assume that that's what it is. And it's always, and there's a lot of hard stuff and difficult stuff about it, but like you don't have, like there's not a gun to our heads. Like nobody's saying you have to do this or what else. You can be God asks us to love Him and love people. You can do that a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be vocational ministry. And so that being said, what can happen sometimes is like when we do ministry stuff, plant churches, whatever, we feel like it has to look a certain way, or we have to do certain things. You see this really play out in like vision statements or whatever. Like what is some technical Christianese thing that sounds like really great, but then no one actually ever says it. It's like that's not your mission or vision statement. It needs to be something that you're actually going to repeat and say. So I found myself spending a lot of time literally saying like, what do you want? What do you want it to look like? And maybe I think on the surface, maybe that sounds or that feels a little, I don't know, selfish or unholy or whatever. Of course, I mean, you need to have guardrails. You need to actually like love Jesus and want that to be a thing. But I just found that we've talked about this a lot of this episode, if you're excited about it, whether it's an event or an initiative or something your church is doing, other people will be excited about it just because they see your excitement for it. Whether it's like you're trying to push something you don't care about, nobody's in on it. Nobody really cares. And so as you think about your church, your ministries, your plant, whatever you're doing, whatever your role is, to spend time thinking about what you want to do, because that'll make you excited and have you work towards a goal. And so there are certain things you have to do. Obviously, I get that, but I found there's often not enough. What do I want to do? Because it could very well be that God has given you certain desires for a reason, but you feel bad about them, so you kind of suppress them and you never pursue them. So dream about what you want to do is just something I found myself saying often, and we would encourage you to say.
Yeah, I think it's good to think about what you want things to look like in the future or things that you want to do. And I think this is an area where it can be helpful to have, whether it's a staff or a management team or elders or whatever, because especially if we start talking about things that are like bigger, then you have some people that can be like, hey, you know, this is a bad idea, or hey, you know, maybe I don't have a specific example, but like, hey, maybe the reason you want to do this isn't exactly the best reason, and we shouldn't pursue it, rather than just being on your own and pursuing something that may be unhealthy or maybe not the greatest for the church. But for the most part, I think for most people, especially when you're talking like at a smaller church where you maybe don't have the biggest ego yet, and you've kind of been beaten down a little bit.
Yes, you have been humbled.
Yeah, right. That probably most of the things you want to do aren't like incredibly
Right.
self-serving and
Right.
things like that. And so it can be good to dream about these things and good to potentially even pursue these things, but it's like you're never going to do anything that you want to do. And obviously, like we all want to run the church, but like
Right.
specific things that you have interest in, you're never going to do them if you never even like spend time thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so spend time thinking about things you want to do. It doesn't mean you have to pursue everything that comes to mind or every interest of yours, but that's how you're going to kind of get to the things that are really enjoyable to do.
Like, let me try to give you 2 quick examples. One, we talked about this a lot. We'll probably do an episode maybe in a few more weeks. We were a couple months ago. It's like I want to do this discipleship thing. I don't know if we've said much about this on the podcast
I don't think
yet.
so. Yeah.
Just like wanted to do more. Like we do like our normal church stuff, but for a while, I've been wanting to do like a more of a discipleship, like with just a few people that other people could also eventually do down the line. I've tried some things, didn't work. I read this book called Replicate by Robert Gallaty. Highly recommend it. I'm basically running that play. One of the things I've just learned often is just learn from people. So like Larry Osborne's Sticky Church groups, we just do what he said. We just do that.
Yep.
And this discipleship thing, I'm just literally doing what the book is saying, and it's worked really, really well. We're calling it discipleship groups. It's me. I meet with the other guys once a week. I'm probably going to do a second group later this year and try to get some other people to do it. But it was just like this desire of wanting to do more and being frustrated that it hasn't happened. And so, you could be like, well, the church just does what it wants to do. But I don't know, because I want to do it, I'm now doing something about it. Now, it may not work. Who knows what it'll turn into. But like if I just felt like, well, it's just what I want to do, but it hasn't really worked in the past. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like literally this new discipleship group thing that I'm trying with a couple of guys and probably do it with more because like I had a desire, it was good, I think, and so we're pursuing it. And because I'm excited about it, there's a higher possibility that it's going to be successful because I want to do it. I wasn't just told.
Yeah. Yeah.
Second thing, real quick, we'll maybe do an episode on this in a little bit too. We're trying to move towards more on Sundays pushing text to sign up for Next Steps.
Yep.
Instead of just like fill the Connect card for a lot of reasons, because you can't fill out a Connect card if you're watching the live stream or listening to a podcast or whatever. And it's like I really wanted to listen to some other larger churches do it. So it's like, let's just try it. And so now we're going to try it for a few months. And I mean, that might sound silly, but it's like I really wanted to try this and it could not work. But we've only used it 1 week and we already got a text sign up that I don't think we would have gotten otherwise. So we'll see. Who knows? I mean, I know that's not going to happen every week given the size of our church.
Yeah.
But like there are these things that like I was desiring for, and now we've looked at it and we've pursued it, and that's a good thing. And so I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I'm just saying when we say like, what do you want to do? I know it sounds very, 22nd century. Is that where we are now? Nobody says that. 22nd century.
No.
It sounds very modern, new agey.
We're in the 21st century.
21st. That's probably why they don't say it.
Yeah.
21st century.
That sounded weird.
Yeah, it's like, that's why nobody says it. That's because we don't live there. We don't live in the 22nd century. I know it sounds very like new agey, self-help, whatever, but like it's just, I think to a degree it can be helpful. And so what are some small things, even in that way, that like our church doesn't normally do this, but I want to see what could happen. At the end of the day, again, if you're excited about it, it will be much more likely to be successful and to turn into something. So just be aware of that and dream about what you want to do.
And I think doing this will help, especially as you bring on staff, it'll help you show them to do that as well. Like you don't want a staff that's just going to come in and be like, this is the way things are done, so we're going to make sure it runs and it's fine. But it never changes or never innovates or never grow. Like it never does anything. Like, I would much rather, and I tell people this, like that we've hired, I would much rather you come up with crazy ideas that fail than just be like, I'm going to come in and it's going to be fine.
Yep.
And nothing bad is going to happen, but it's going to be just fine. But no one's going to do that if no one else is, or if like the leadership isn't. And so doing this it'll help you, but it'll also help your people that you hire like enjoy it a little bit more because they'll get to have some say in the way things are done. But also it can help really bring out some creative and good ideas that may not have come to surface otherwise.
Yep. So dream about what you want to do, or if it makes you feel better, what God might be leading you to do. Ministry does not have to be miserable in all facets. So take some time to think about that. Number 4, another helpful tip is that we would say that you can be friends with people in your church.
Can.
And, so there's lots of different ideas about this. I think part of it is changing just because culture is changing. So 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't know. I mean, I didn't live then, but when you lead, it's kind of more of a top-down, heavy leadership style. You do what I say to do because I want you to do it. Now you need to be a little bit more relatable and all the other stuff. Mm-hmm. But it just, again, we're shaped by our experiences, so I do think some people that have said don't do this is because they've been really wounded. And I personally have not been really wounded. And so it's easier for me to say, you know, yeah, there might be some unfortunate things every once in a while, but it's fine. So I get that.
Yeah.
But I just think it's a lot better. And I think we said on the podcast too, like part of the reason that ministry or even leadership in general can be miserable is because we make it miserable. Like, yes, there's some isolating things that maybe certain people don't know about, but you can also reach out to other pastors, join other networks and denominations, right? Why I say don't plant by yourself. But I want to say with your church, like you can be friends, and there might be things you can't say sometimes, and so I get that because of, yeah, just not appropriate or whatever.
Right.
But it doesn't mean you can't say nothing or like. So like for me, for example, how this works out, like our community groups, I might say like, hey, it's been a difficult week, or I have to have a hard conversation this week, and because of the size of our church, I have to sometimes be really vague. Whereas if you're a larger church, you might not have to be as vague.
Right. Yeah.
But people are like really respectful. Like no one's ever said, so who is it that you're talking to?
Yeah.
Like that's never happened.
Yeah.
But I've also found like you have to, if you want, I feel like too, if you want a culture of people being friendly and vulnerable with one another, it starts with the leaders doing that. And so like I try to go out of my way, or like the discipleship group that I'm leading that we were just talking about, you know, we talk about, one of the things we talk about every week is one good thing, one bad thing, or we have a list of questions we ask each other. And like one of the questions is like, did I do anything this week I need to repent of or whatever? And I'm always trying to like lead in that vulnerability, because if I don't, then the other people won't.
Yeah,
Because it's
for
like,
sure.
oh, they have everything together, so no one can be honest. And so what it has to do with being friends, like you can be friends, you can be honest, you can be vulnerable. You don't have to tell them everything. You might not be as super specific, but if you're kind of guarded, then I think that'll set the culture to be up guarded, and it's just not good for you. It's good to have fun and to do ministry with people you like. So
Yeah, for sure. And this is something I had never really thought about, that it was like appropriate or inappropriate. Like it never even really crossed my mind until a few years ago. Like I grew up at a big mega church, and I mean, some people knew the pastor, but obviously most people didn't, because it was like thousands of people there, and you wouldn't really expect to. But at a small church, I just always assumed, like, of course you would. Until I guess it was maybe a year or 2 years ago, something like that. Someone that we had on staff at the time, she had mentioned she had just come on staff, and her maybe roommate or best friend or something like that, I forget, goes to the church as well. And she was told by some ministry leader, not in the church, but like basically, well, they can't be your friend anymore, essentially. And she was telling me that, and I was like, what? Like, if that was like a thing or something that needed to be implemented, like I would quit tomorrow. Like I have zero interest in leading people that I can't have any relationship with or can't be friends with. And yeah, of course there has to be boundaries. Of course there's things you shouldn't share or say in like larger group settings. There's only certain people, and all that's fine. But to say you can't be friends with the people at your church, I would be like, why are you planting a church to begin with? Like, I think we're supposed to have relationships with people, and not just, otherwise it's like just plant an online ministry and just like preach to YouTube and see who shows up. Like the point is to know people and to have relationships with people, not just to preach on Sunday mornings.
yeah, so the encouragement is you can't be friends with everybody, tell everybody everything, but to at least have a few people that you can be as honest as you can.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why it's nice to have a friend or two that doesn't go to your church, and you can say everything that you might not be able to say to them. But yeah, that you can be really honest, like, hey, I'm really discouraged. And even if you can't say like what exactly is happening, I do think you can share, again, in my experience, you can share more than you think you can in terms of like, oh, I can't tell anyone I'm having a bad day because I don't know. So you can be friends, maybe not with everybody, but you can, and we would say you should, because you will be, more miserable and more discouraged and all that sort of things if you kind of feel like you have to be somehow different than them. Because these are the people too, like you're not only like in ministry, you're like it's a really connected between like your work and your life, because like you're doing life with all these people.
Yeah.
And so all these people that you see all the time and you can't be close with any of them, it wouldn't be good. And so, you can figure out what that looks like for you and certain boundaries or whatever, what you can and cannot say. But I would say pursue it and try it, and don't be like, well, I'm the pastor now, so I can't, we can't be friends.
Oh, yeah.
It's just weird.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 5, you can set a healthy schedule. And of course, this isn't a huge surprise because we talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
But it's just a good reminder that I think a lot of times when we have schedule autonomy, in other words, if we control our schedule to various degrees, we assume all this will be great, but then it oftentimes even gets worse than like a typical job that tells you where to be where. Because it can be hard to, you feel like you got to, like whenever you're available, you have to, if someone wants to meet, then you have to do it. Whereas if you like worked a job, it's like, I can only do these hours. And so things can kind of get muddy and things can take longer or whatever. And so, we're big fans of, we talked on various episodes about, creating a weekly rhythm where like there should be certain hours of your week every week. This, for example, if you're like in full-time vocational ministry, where like you are set to work on certain tasks you do every week, whether it's, I don't know, counting, sermon prep, Bible study prep, whatever tasks you have. And then you can have some flexibility in other hours that people can choose to meet with you from if you meet with a lot of people or whatever. But it shouldn't just be like wide open season from 9 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday for you. And so you can do that. And I know it feels really weird or bad, especially if you're newer starting out, because you feel like you got to be places where everyone. Again, most people don't expect if they ask to meet with you that you're going to meet with them in the next hour. Like, they don't expect that. Like, we put it on ourselves. And as long as you have rhythms of following up with people and they know they're going to be heard from, they really are okay with it. But I just want to say you can set a healthy schedule. And so if you feel really busy and overwhelmed, that's not just ministry. That's not just because you're in ministry and it is what it is. That is, you're in ministry and you haven't set yourself up well. Like, this might sound bad, but it just makes me think of, I do a weekly newsletter every week. And so one of the things that I said in there, the one that came out on the day of this recording, was like, I forget how I phrase it, but it's something effective. Like, a lot of times in life we say, well, I'm not the type of person that handles money well, or I'm not a good cook, or I'm not. What we should say is I'm not a person who chooses to do fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Which is not wrong or right. You have certain desires, hobbies, only a certain amount of hours in the day. You can't do everything. But a lot of times when we say, well, I'm just not that type of person, or ministry is just hectic, we feel like it kind of abdicates the responsibility. Then no, we're choosing to do it this way. And so maybe there's a little bit of a ramble, but you can set a healthy schedule. And if it's not, it's because you need to choose to do some things differently. It's not inevitable just because you're in ministry.
And I think as like a pastor, for most people, if someone in your congregation or someone that you knew was talking about how they have an unhealthy schedule at work, you would be very quick to, not just like correct them, but to talk to them about how maybe that's something they need to work on and how to solve that. But for some reason, ministry is like, it's okay to have an unhealthy schedule, or it's expected to have an unhealthy schedule, but it shouldn't be. Like, you still have the same amount of hours as everyone else who does every other job in the world. And there's different things that come with ministry that don't come with most other jobs. There's probably a lot more like personal things that some other jobs don't come with, but it doesn't mean that you can't schedule things, and doesn't mean that you can't set a healthy schedule. And this isn't just like set a healthy schedule so you'll be more productive, so you can get more things done, which all that's true, but it's also like that way you can have a healthy family life. And that way when you go home, you can actually be home and not home remembering all the stuff that you didn't do during the day, or checking email because you forgot to check it during the day, or doing this thing because you didn't manage your time well at work, and so you're taking it home with you. All those different things that goes into it. But having a healthy schedule is helpful for like every aspect, and it's helpful for just being a healthy human. And ministry is not shouldn't be the exception to that.
Yep. So again, you just want to be proactive, find what works, find what doesn't. Limit. We talk about boundaries too, like limit, proactively schedule, like or decide how many nights a week you're going to be doing stuff, or when your day off is, what it's going to look like ahead of time. So it's really easy to say yes and no to things. But you can set a healthy schedule, and if it's not healthy, you need to change some things because that's not good. And then last but not least, number 6 ministry tip you may not know about is that personal invitations are always greater than general asks. And I think we kind of know this theoretically, but then we might not always do it. But anytime you want people to do anything, asking them to do it is always better than just sending a blanket, hey, who wants to do this? And then, of course, it's a little counterintuitive because then it sets a little bit higher bar, and we kind of think that people just want to do the easier thing.
Yeah.
But when it's harder, people commit. So, for example, when people sell online courses for more money, they get more people, because if something seems free or cheap, then you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right? If someone, for example, were to offer to watch your kids for $5 an hour, you'd be like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like it just feels weird. And so you want to elevate it up a little bit. Again, this is a recent thing for me, talking about this discipleship group. I've tried a couple of things like beginning of this year. I did like this men's Bible study, it's different than our community groups, and we're going to meet literally right across the street from the church. And a lot of people said they're interested. Not a lot of them showed up, which is normal. But then it got down to like 2 guys a week, and it felt like work. I didn't want to be there. Like it wasn't help. It just wasn't what I wanted. And so I ended up stopping doing it. And now, but it was very like, whoever wants to come. Yeah. And that's fine. But for this discipleship group, there's 3 guys. I only emailed like 8 total. 2 of them said thanks but no thanks. 3 of them said they really wanted to do it, but schedules didn't align. And then 3 of them, I think that was the math. I don't know. So but I was just like super surprised. Like I only emailed 8 people. For the men's Bible study, I emailed like 25. And like they were like, yes, I want to do it. all this sort of thing. We've been doing it for like 7 weeks now. They actually we actually meet earlier than what I wanted to do because they wanted to spend more time talking, and so it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, it was a great thing of like, I just personally asked a few people to do something, whereas if it was like even if it was like a church-wide email, hey, I'm going to do a discipleship group. If you're interested, like it wouldn't work. But when I initially emailed these guys, I said, it's high commitment. Here's what I'm asking you to do. If you can't come, and no, it's fine. Like if work schedule is fine, but like unless you can be there every week, this isn't going to work for you. We're going to talk about sin. We're going to memorize the Bible. We're going to read it. All these sort of things. And it was like people said yes.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, with whatever you're trying to do, whether you're trying to raise money, like you can from stage say, hey, we need to raise X amount of dollars. But having those personal conversations, or if you want people to serve, again, just doing a church announcement is fine, but actually one-on-one or like making it personal, it's a big deal. And so. Just always, personal invitations for anything you're doing are better than general asks.
Yeah, people only hear a certain amount of what you say when it's like a public statement. And so saying things from the pulpit, like talking about giving or serving or all these things, like it's good, you should do that, but you can't expect everyone's going to internalize everything that you say because humans just aren't wired that way. And so a lot of that will probably fall on deaf ears for some of the time. But contacting someone one-on-one and saying, hey, I'd like you to be a part of this, it's way more personal. It lets them know that you're actually thinking of them. And even if it's something that's like giving, like we've done not a building campaign, but moving, whatever we call it. What do we call it?
I don't know.
Move into a new building,
there you go.
Fundraising. And there was definitely people that we had to contact and be like, hey, we need to raise this much money. Can you help out? Instead of just saying it from the stage, which saying it from the stage, there's a lot of people who were super generous and it was great. But some people just need kind of that one-on-one ask, and that can be for anything. Like if you find that not a lot of people are serving in your church or you're having trouble with that, you should mention it from stage 100%. But at some point, you're gonna have to just contact some people who are dedicated to the church and just say, hey, I'd love to have you on this team. What do you think? And it doesn't need to be this like you have to address everyone and hopefully this one person hears. But some people just really appreciate having that one-on-one ask for whatever it is, even if it's something small.
Yeah, so if you're discouraged about group signups or people serving in this ministry or whatever, I totally get it. But the encouragement is, but are you asking specific people? So like if you need more group leaders, you can say from stage, hey, sign up for a group, or if you're interested in leading a group, you might not get anybody. But if you actually said, hey, you've been really consistent, would you consider this, whatever, do you have any desire? You're much more likely to get someone to do something. Now, of course, we're not trying to manipulate people and try to get people to do what they don't want to do. But if you are just generally discouraged because you're trying to do whatever it is, even if you're trying to grow a launch team, well, you should go to practicalplanting.com/launch and check out our course because that will tell you exactly what to do. But even general thing, it's like, yeah, I do these Facebook posts or I've got like this email thing and I emailed 100 people and like no one's showing up. And it's like, well, okay, that's not working. Did you how many like individual emails or conversations or phone calls or texts have you done? Because you'll get a much higher rate of response than just a general, whoever wants to come.
This literally just happened with us. We've been needing new group leaders for a while, and we've had things like we've addressed it publicly, but also told group leaders like, hey, address it in your group if anyone's interested. And we haven't got anything until last week or maybe it was the week before. It dawned on me. I was like, oh yeah, there's this person who said they may be interested down the road a while back. And so I asked them and they're like, yep. I was like, we've been looking for a leader for a while now. And it's just like if people aren't some people, if they're not asked specifically, they don't kind of put that together that they could be that person or for whatever reason, or they just miss that communication. But just that simple ask, and it was a 2-second ask, and it's like, great, now all of our problems are solved for right now. But that wouldn't have happened if we just kept going kind of the way we were going and didn't make a personal ask.
Yep. So there you go. 6 helpful ministry tips you might not know about. Try those. We found them helpful, and so will you.
Yep.
And also, again, this episode is brought to you by ambassadorsministries.com/practical. Get some fundraising coaching for free because they'll also run your money for you, so you don't have to run it through the church, which we've also found to be a very good thing because we've done it both ways. So check them out, and a lot of great help there. Again, we're just big proponents of getting more people on staff, and you can do it. Also, practicalplanting.com, our website, lots of free resources in, and if you're on Facebook, the Practical Church Planting Facebook group.
Yep.
And that's all for this episode. We'll see you next week on Practical Church Planting.